The judge's voice still echoed in my mind as I sat motionless in the kitchen, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the table. My fingers trembled around the thick envelope that had just arrived, its contents still spread open beside a half-drunk mug of tea. The words "petition for custody" glared back at me, sharp and final. My name is Emily Dawson, and I never imagined I'd be fighting to keep my son. Liam was 6 years old, with wide green eyes and a laugh that could light up the darkest corner of a room. Since losing my husband Michael 2 years ago in a sudden car crash, it had been just the two of us. I wasn't perfect. I grieved. I cried in silence. I forgot laundry. But I showed up for him every single day. Michael's mother, Vivian Langley, had never approved of me. Not when we were dating, not when we married, and certainly not after Michael was gone. At first, I mistook her presence in our lives for shared grief. She would bring Liam small gifts, attend school events, and sit politely during dinners. But behind her carefully chosen words and polite smiles was a storm of judgment. She questioned how I dressed Liam. She criticized our bedtime routines. She once said I was raising him on emotion instead of structure. I tried to ignore her. I tried to be kind. But kindness has limits. I began setting boundaries. Clear ones. Shorter visits. No undermining me in front of Liam. That's when her demeanor changed. That's when the games began. It started with subtle comments. Then it became accusations. And now a court summons. She wanted full custody. Not visitation. Not joint responsibility. Full, legal, and physical custody of my son. The petition painted me as unstable, financially insecure, incapable. I sat there on the cold tile floor, reading words that twisted my worst moments into ammunition against me. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was angry. But most of all, I was terrified. Liam was just in the other room, humming to himself, building towers with his dinosaur toys. He had no idea that someone was trying to take him away from everything he knew. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and called the only person I could trust, my older sister, Rachel. She arrived within an hour, brushing past my tears and going straight for the documents. "This is a war, she said, flipping through the pages with a scowl. "And we're going to need armor." I couldn't afford a private attorney, so I was assigned a public defender. He was well-meaning, but overworked, and mostly told me to stay calm and document everything. Meanwhile, Vivian had hired one of the sharpest family lawyers in the state. Her case was polished, ruthless, and well-funded. That night, after Liam went to bed, I opened a notebook and started writing. I wrote down everything. Every encounter, every phone call, every school report. I collected medical records, letters from Liam's teachers, even photos from birthdays and school projects. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. But I kept going. Because I had to. Because someone was trying to rewrite my story as a mother, and I wasn't going to let them. The first court appearance was brutal. Vivian sat across the room in a designer suit, looking composed and powerful. Her lawyer painted me as fragile, incapable, broken. I sat still, my hands clasped tight in my lap, repeating the same words in my head. "You are his mother. You are enough." When we returned home that evening, Liam climbed into my lap and asked, "Why did Grandma look so mad?" I didn't have an answer. I just hugged him tighter. That night, I found a drawing on the fridge. Liam had drawn the two of us standing in front of our house, holding hands. Above our heads in red crayon he wrote, "Me and Mommy. Always." I wanted to believe those words. But the fear wouldn't let me rest. The legal storm was far from over, and I knew Vivian wasn't done. Days turned into weeks, each one heavier than the last. CPS showed up at my door one afternoon after someone had filed an anonymous tip. I stood in my living room, answering questions while Liam played quietly with his Legos in the background. The caseworker left with a polite nod, but her presence lingered like a shadow. Vivian's tactics were becoming more vicious, and my strength was wearing thin. Still, I pushed forward. I had to. Not just for me, but for the little boy who called me his heart. And just when I thought I was holding it together, Liam asked me one night, "Am I going to have to live in 2 houses?" My voice caught. I told him everything would be okay, But the truth was, I didn't know. I only knew one thing for sure. I wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. The court date was looming. My evidence was organized, my story ready. But nothing could prepare me for what would happen next, or for the 6-year-old boy who would quietly rise and change everything. The morning of the final hearing arrived cloaked in gray clouds, as if the sky itself understood the weight of the day. I dressed Liam in his favorite navy sweater, the one with the little dinosaur patch he insisted was lucky. I braided his hair gently, packed an extra snack in case the wait was long, and held his small hand as we walked toward the courthouse. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside the courtroom, the air was dense and cold. The echo of heels, the shuffle of papers, the low murmurs of legal teams, it all felt surreal. I sat beside my lawyer, clutching a folder filled with photos, schoolwork, and printed emails like a shield against what was to come. Across from us sat Vivian Langley, perfectly composed in her beige designer coat, her silver hair immaculately pinned. Her lawyer, a tall, self-assured man with a leather briefcase and a voice that could cut glass, glanced at me only once. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, entered the courtroom and took her seat. "We are ready to proceed," she said, her voice steady. Vivian's attorney stood first. He painted a picture of order and structure, claiming that Liam needed stability, routine, and academic excellence, things he insisted I could not provide. He described my home as chaotic, my lifestyle as uncertain. "Miss Dawson works freelance," he emphasized, "without consistent income. She has no immediate family support nearby and is still actively grieving the loss of her husband." His words were like cold steel, carefully sharpened and aimed to wound. I sat still, my breathing shallow. I wanted to speak. I wanted to scream. But I remembered Rachel's voice from the night before. "Let them see who you are. The truth will be louder than anything they say." When my turn came, I stood slowly, legs shaking but back straight. I spoke of our days, Liam's school schedule, bedtime stories, our Tuesday library visits. I showed photos of birthday parties, letters from his teachers praising his progress, medical records confirming his health and development. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told the truth. When I finished, the judge nodded thoughtfully and leaned forward, as if preparing to end the session. Then it happened. Liam tugged at my sleeve, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I go say something?" I looked at him confused. "To the judge," he added, already stepping away. My heart stopped. I reached for his hand, but it was too late. He walked to the front of the courtroom, pulling a folded piece of paper from his tiny Spider-Man backpack. The room went still. Every breath, every movement paused. Even Vivian looked stunned. Liam placed the paper on the desk, smoothed it with both hands, and cleared his throat. "My name is Liam Dawson," he began, standing barely tall enough to reach the microphone. "I'm 6. I like dinosaurs and grilled cheese and playing with my mom." His voice was soft but steady. "I want to live with my mom." A wave of silence followed his words, thick and unmoving. Then he continued. "My mom gives me hugs when I feel bad. She makes pancakes on Sundays and lets me pour the syrup, even if I spill it. She laughs at my jokes, even the ones that don't make sense. When I have nightmares, she lets me sleep in her bed. She calls me her heart." I couldn't blink. I couldn't move. My chest ached with emotion. Liam's little fingers gripped the paper tighter as he went on. "Sometimes we miss my dad and we cry. But then she tells me stories about him and we light a candle and say nice things. She says it's okay to be sad and okay to be happy again too." He looked up at the judge. "Grandma says my mom is too soft. But I think soft is good. I don't want to live somewhere that doesn't let me feel things. I want to live with the person who lets me be a kid." He folded the letter slowly, placed it back in his backpack, and walked to his seat beside me. Without a word, he slid his hand into mine. I squeezed it, trying not to fall apart. The judge sat motionless for several seconds. Then she spoke. "This court acknowledges the statement given by the minor, Mr. Liam Dawson. While it is unusual for a child to speak in this context, it is evident that these words are his own and reflect significant emotional insight." My heart pounded in my ears. The judge turned to Vivian's lawyer. I have reviewed the petition and accompanying documentation submitted by Mrs. Langley and her legal counsel. There is no evidence of abuse, neglect, or emotional endangerment. The child appears bonded and emotionally secure in the care of his mother. Vivian shifted in her seat, lips pressed into a thin, rigid line. The judge then turned to me. Ms. Dawson, this court finds you fit to retain full legal and physical custody of your son. Visitation rights for Mrs. Langley may be addressed through mediation, but there is no justification for removal of custody. I felt my knees give way as I dropped to the bench, clutching Liam against my chest. My boy, my brave, beautiful boy, had stood up and saved us. Vivian did not speak as we walked past her. Her jaw clenched, her eyes locked forward. I didn't look back. I just held Liam's hand and stepped into the hallway, where the cold gray light had softened into something warmer. Outside, the world hadn't changed, but everything had. The day after the hearing, everything looked the same, and yet nothing felt the same. The kitchen still smelled faintly of lavender from the candle we always lit during breakfast. Liam still scrambled out of bed before the sun was fully up, dragging me into the kitchen to pour his own cereal and splash milk everywhere. The furniture hadn't moved. The floors still creaked in the same places. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I had stood in court and fought for my son, and won. Liam's letter was taped to the refrigerator with a green dinosaur magnet. His handwriting, uneven and sweet, ran across the lined paper like a river of truth. He had signed his name at the bottom in red crayon and drawn a little heart next to it. I stood there for a long time, rereading it word for word, line by line, until my eyes burned and I had to sit down. He had written it not because I told him to, not because he thought it would help me win, but because he wanted the judge to see me. He wanted to protect the life we had, the love we shared. That morning, I sat with a cup of coffee in my hands, staring out the window as Liam played on the living room floor. Rachel called. "You did it," she said simply. Her voice was soft, proud. "You stood your ground." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't processed it yet. The fear that had wrapped around my chest for weeks hadn't fully let go. Part of me still expected someone to knock on the door and say it was a mistake. But as the hours passed, that fear began to loosen. Not disappear, not yet, but loosen. Liam noticed it too. "Mommy," he said, climbing onto my lap, "can we go to the park today?" I nodded. "Just us." I smiled and kissed his forehead. "Just us." At the park, he ran straight for the swings, his laughter echoing across the open air. I sat on the bench, watching the way the wind lifted his hair, how his feet kicked toward the clouds. The lightness in his movements. It was different. Like he had let go of something heavy too. When he came running back, cheeks flushed, he asked if we could call Daddy's old number again. We used to do that sometimes. It was a voicemail that Michael had recorded years ago, one I couldn't bear to delete. I pulled out my phone, dialed the number, and handed it to Liam. He held it to his ear, eyes wide and serious. "Daddy," he whispered, "the judge said I get to stay with Mommy." I was brave, just like you. I looked away, blinking hard against the tears. That message wasn't for closure. It was a declaration. My son had carried his own torch through the darkness and lit the way for us both. Over the next few weeks, the storm calmed. The court appointed a mediator to help navigate visitation. I didn't want to see Vivian again, not after what she did, but Liam still loved her in his own quiet, complex way. I didn't want to teach him that love had to come with hatred attached, so I agreed to once-a-month supervised visits, on neutral ground. Vivian didn't apologize. Not for the lawsuit. Not for the accusations. Not for trying to paint me as unfit. But I no longer needed her apology to breathe freely. She arrived at the first visit exactly on time, dressed impeccably, with a small gift in hand. Liam was cautious at first, but polite. I stayed in the background, watching closely. There was no warmth in her smile, but there was restraint, perhaps even the faintest flicker of understanding. The conversation was stiff, the laughter forced. But Liam didn't seem afraid, and that was enough for me. I had drawn my boundaries. And this time, she knew better than to push them. At home, I returned to work slowly, picking up more freelance clients, carving out a little stability one project at a time. Liam started drawing again. Dozens of pictures of dinosaurs, castles, and superheroes. One night, he handed me one he had folded carefully. It was of me, in a blue cape, standing on a hill with a heart over my head. "You're my hero," he said. My throat closed. "You're mine," I whispered back. There were still nights I woke up in a cold sweat, unsure if it had all been real. I'd tiptoe to his room, peek in, and see him sleeping peacefully, his arms wrapped around his stuffed tiger, mouth open slightly, dreaming whatever dreams a 6-year-old dreams. That's when I knew. It wasn't just real. It was ours. Hard-earned. Fought for. Safe. Being a mother, I'd learned, isn't about always knowing the right thing. It isn't about having the best answers or the most organized life. It's about showing up. Again and again. Even when you're tired. Even when you're terrified. Even when your hands shake and your heart doubts. It's about holding the line for the ones you love. That's what I did. And that's what I'll keep doing, no matter what else life throws our way. Even as the court battle became something behind us instead of in front of us, the weight of it didn't simply vanish. It lingered in the quiet moments, like a bruise under the surface of everything. The first week after the ruling, I kept expecting the phone to ring with bad news. I jumped every time the doorbell sounded. It was as if my mind couldn't fully accept the idea that the threat had passed, that we were safe, that no one was coming to take Liam away. I still packed his lunch with a level of urgency that didn't make sense, like I was racing against an invisible clock that might run out. I kept everything. Court documents, letters, Liam's drawing, even the dress I wore that day, in a box under my bed. I wasn't ready to look at it, but I couldn't let it go either. Rachel noticed. She came over one Saturday with a bag of groceries and that no-nonsense energy she always carried like armor. "You need to exhale, she said as she placed tomatoes on the counter. "The fight's over." I shook my head. "It doesn't feel over." She didn't argue. She just set a chocolate bar in front of me and went to play cards with Liam in the living room. Vivian's monthly visits continued, monitored by a social worker from the family court. Each one was tense, transactional, and rigid. She would bring Liam toys or books and ask about school. But there was no warmth, no curiosity about the life we had rebuilt. She spoke to him like a guest she was trying to impress, not a child she hoped to know. Liam seemed to sense it too. He was always polite but never ran into her arms or clung to her when time was up. He walked in. He walked out. And that was that. One afternoon, after one of those visits, Liam looked up at me from the back seat of the car and asked, "Why does Grandma never laugh?" I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to shield him from bitterness, from the mess of adult intentions. So I told him the truth in pieces. "Some people are just quieter in their hearts," I said. "But that doesn't mean you have to be." He nodded and looked out the window, then quietly started humming a tune he made up on the spot. We found new rhythms in the weeks that followed. Liam started a music program at the community center and fell in love with the drums. Our home began to echo with the steady beat of wooden sticks on rubber pads. It was chaos. It was loud. It was life. We went to the park more, lingered longer in the library, ate pancakes for dinner, sometimes just because we could. I started laughing more too. Real laughter. The kind that doesn't carry tension in its shadow. But still, there were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything I had said in court, everything that had been said about me. I remembered Vivian's lawyer using words like unstable, emotionally compromised, financially unprepared. They clung to me like old names I had to keep shedding. I remembered the way Vivian looked at me, not with anger, but with certainty, like she truly believed Liam would be better off without me. And sometimes, even after everything, those words tried to crawl back into my mind. Tried to make me doubt. But then Liam would say something like, "I love our weird house," or ask if we could light a candle for Daddy, or call me the bravest mommy in the world, and it would all dissolve like sugar in tea. One night, he came into my room after a nightmare. He didn't cry, just climbed into bed beside me and pressed his forehead against my shoulder. "You're soft," he mumbled. "But strong like superheroes are strong." I smiled into the dark. "That's the best kind of strong," I whispered. And I believed it. For the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. I wasn't broken. I wasn't unfit. I was rebuilding. From the inside out. There was one more thing I needed to do. One final piece of closure I hadn't dared to attempt. I wrote a letter to Michael. It wasn't long. Just a page. I told him everything, the fight, the fear, the day Liam stood in that courtroom and spoke with a courage beyond his years. I told him how our son was growing into someone kind and funny and incredibly strong, and I told him I missed him. I folded the letter, tucked it into an envelope, and walked with Liam to the edge of the lake where we used to take Sunday walks. We each held a small boat made of paper. Liam had drawn a dinosaur on his. I had drawn a heart. We placed the boats in the water and watched them drift. As they floated farther, Liam whispered, "Do you think Daddy knows?" I nodded. I think he always knew. We stood there a long time, hand in hand, until the paper boats disappeared into the horizon. The weight wasn't gone, but I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. Liam held part of it with me, and together, we were finding our way forward, one soft, strong step at a time. The week Liam brought home the photo frame, something shifted again, subtle but certain, like a door I didn't realize was closed finally creaking open. He had made it in art class, a square of popsicle sticks glued together and painted in neon swirls with little stickers spelling out "Me and Mom." Inside the frame was a picture I hadn't even known he had, one Rachel must have printed and given to him, of the two of us sitting on the couch, Liam mid-laugh, my head thrown back, flour dusting both our cheeks. It was taken the day we tried to make cookies and ended up making a mess instead. I hadn't looked at that photo in months. He handed it to me with both hands, serious as always when giving gifts. "This is for you," he said, "but also for me. So we always remember." I knelt down, holding it between us. "Remember what, sweetheart?" His eyes flicked toward the kitchen, where the letter still hung on the fridge. "That even when things were really hard," we laughed. And we stayed. I wrapped my arms around him, heart swelling with something I couldn't name but had waited my whole life to feel. Recognition, not just as a mother, but as his safe place. I placed the frame on the nightstand beside my bed, where I could see it each morning and every night. It became more than decoration. It was a quiet anthem, a reminder that love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers from a child's drawing, or sits quietly in the back of a courtroom holding a letter. Life settled into something soft, something sacred. The tension that once haunted every corner of our home began to lift. I didn't flinch at the mail anymore. I stopped checking the locks twice. The shadows grew smaller. But not everything healed at the same pace. Vivian's visits had become increasingly strained. She was never unkind to Liam, but there was no effort to truly connect. It became clear that she had expected the court decision to be temporary, reversible, perhaps, if I slipped up. But I didn't. I held steady. I kept every appointment, responded to every message from the mediator, maintained every rule. There was nothing left for her to challenge. One afternoon during her fourth visit, she sat across from Liam at the supervised center, holding a book she had brought. "Would you like me to read this to you?" she asked. Liam shrugged. "Mom already read that one." He wasn't being rude, just honest. Vivian's smile faltered. She closed the book and placed it back in her lap. That was the moment I knew she had begun to see the reality. Liam didn't need saving. He needed someone to stand beside him, not someone trying to replace his mother. After the visit, the social worker approached me. "He's a very emotionally aware child," she said gently. "That usually means there's a lot of safety at home." I nodded, her words sinking in deeper than she probably realized. We began to rebuild not just our routine, but our future. I signed Liam up for a summer art camp he'd been eyeing for months. I took on a new design contract that helped stabilize our finances. Rachel helped us repaint the living room, and we turned our tiny hallway into a gallery wall filled with Liam's artwork. We laughed more. We made pancakes on Tuesdays just because. We cried less, not because grief had vanished, but because we had grown stronger shoulders to carry it. Still, on quiet evenings when Liam fell asleep early, I would sometimes sit at the table with a cup of tea and reopen the box under my bed. I didn't do it to relive the pain. I did it to remember how far we had come. Inside the box were Liam's drawings, letters, court transcripts, even the flyer from that library reading hour. But on top of it all, I had placed the folded copy of his courtroom letter. I read it again one night, my fingers tracing each line, and suddenly I knew what I had to do. I framed it. I placed it on the wall beside our front door, not to boast, not to show anyone else, but for us. For me. For Liam. For every time we walked into our home and needed to remember that love had been tested and love had endured. When Liam saw it, he beamed. "Is that real?" he asked. "Very real," I said. He stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "I was really brave, wasn't I?" I pulled him close. "You were the bravest person I've ever known." That night, as I tucked him into bed, he asked if we could write another letter, this time to someone else. "To who?" I asked. "To the next kid who has to go to court," he replied. "So they know it's okay to be scared and still speak up." I kissed the top of his head, blinking back tears. "Okay," I whispered. "We'll write it together." And we did. By the end of that summer, the sharp edges of everything that had happened began to dull. They didn't disappear, but they stopped cutting every time I breathed. Our days settled into something beautiful in their ordinariness. Liam thrived in his art camp, coming home with glitter in his eyebrows and stories tumbling out of his mouth faster than he could speak them. Our fridge was a collage of his imagination. Spaceships, dinosaurs, pictures of us holding hands on wild adventures only he could invent. And for the first time in years, I started to feel like we weren't just surviving life. We were living it. The freelance work picked up. I got a small studio contract designing branding for a children's literacy initiative. It was part-time, remote, flexible, everything I needed. I finally bought us a new couch, soft gray with wide arms for reading and naps. Rachel helped me string up fairy lights above our window, and Liam named each bulb after a different superhero. The house was small, still creaky, still imperfect, but now it felt like a sanctuary. Not the place we had escaped to, but the place we had chosen. Vivian's visits had become less frequent. After 6 months, she stopped scheduling them. There was no fight, no final confrontation, just absence. And in a strange way, I was grateful. She had taken so much space in my mind for so long. Her silence became a gift I hadn't known I needed. I didn't tell Liam that she wasn't coming anymore. I let him ask when he noticed. "Is Grandma okay?" he asked one Saturday morning as we folded laundry. "I think so," I replied gently. But sometimes people walk away when they don't know how to say what they really feel. He looked at me for a long time and nodded, like he understood more than I ever had at his age. One day in late August, Liam came home from camp with a small notebook. On the first page, he had written the title, "How to Be Brave." It had stick figure illustrations, crooked letters, and all the heart in the world. Page 1 said, "Be scared, but do it anyway." Page 2 read, "Say the truth out loud." Page 3, "Love big. Especially your mom." I cried quietly as I read each page. He had turned everything we had been through into something soft, something usable. He had taken the chaos and made it a guidebook for hope. I decided to write too, not just for myself but for others. I began sharing our story online in small pieces. I didn't use real names. I didn't frame myself as a hero. I just told the truth. About grief, about motherhood, about courtrooms and soft hands holding crumpled letters. People wrote back. Mothers. Fathers. Grown children who remembered what it felt like to be heard, or worse, to be ignored. My inbox filled with stories, some painful, some full of light. I responded to each one, even if it was just to say, "I see you." Liam asked one night if we could add a new photo to the frame on my nightstand. "This one," he said, holding out a picture of the two of us with paint all over our hands, laughing in front of a half-finished mural we'd started on the garage wall. "We look like superheroes in this one." I swapped it out with care, placing the older photo in the keepsake box. The new one made the nightstand glow. It was wild, colorful, completely messy. It was perfect. We started doing something new too. Every Sunday night before bed, we lit a candle and wrote down one thing that made us proud that week. We kept the notes in a jar on the kitchen shelf. Even small stuff? Liam asked the first time. Especially the small stuff, I replied. Because it's the small stuff, the little moments, the quiet victories, that build a life, that build strength, that build homes from ruins. One night, a full year after the court ruling, I found Liam asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, holding that same notebook. How to Be Brave rested on his chest like a badge. I sat beside him and gently pulled the blanket higher. In his sleep, he whispered, "I knew we could do it." I closed my eyes. He wasn't just talking about the custody case. He was talking about us. About everything we had endured. Everything we had reclaimed. The next morning, I added a new sticky note to the jar. We built piece from pieces. And that, more than anything, was our story now. The first anniversary of the court ruling came quietly. No dramatic sunrise. No candlelit ceremony. Just a regular Tuesday morning with cereal on the table, a half-finished math worksheet, and the sound of Liam humming as he brushed his teeth. I stood at the kitchen sink, hands submerged in warm, soapy water, when I realized I wasn't holding my breath anymore. The quiet inside me wasn't fear. It was peace. Not the kind handed to you, but the kind you earn one painful, determined inch at a time. Liam had changed too. He still loved dinosaurs and superhero capes and pouring syrup until the plate turned into a puddle. But there was a sturdiness in him now, something carved from truth and tested by fire. His teachers called it emotional maturity. I called it knowing how to carry light even after walking through dark places. That morning, he left a note in my bag. "In case you forget, I love you the most." It was written in blue marker with a drawing of two stick figures, one tall, one small, both holding hands. I pinned it to the inside of my planner and carried it everywhere. We never talked much about the court anymore. Sometimes, Liam would mention Grandma Vivian, usually in passing. She liked those cookies, or she wears perfume that smells like flowers and cold metal. But he never asked why she didn't come around anymore. I didn't offer details. I simply said, some people love in ways we can't always understand, and he seemed content with that. I think he sensed that some love, when forced, can hurt more than it heals. And Liam, my tender, brilliant boy, had learned early how to protect his own heart. I kept writing. The posts turned into essays. The essays into longer letters. One of them, titled "Soft is Strong," was shared hundreds of times. Parents wrote to me from courtrooms, hospital rooms, bedrooms lit only by the glow of doubt, telling me they had needed those words. Some had their own Liams. Others had been the Liam once as children. I didn't have answers for them, but I offered presence. And sometimes, presence is the most powerful thing we can give. Rachel and I hosted a small dinner on the anniversary evening. Nothing big, just spaghetti, candles, and Liam's favorite garlic bread. We each shared something we were grateful for. Liam stood on his chair and raised a plastic cup of juice like a toast. "I'm grateful," he said, "for the letter. And for my mom who stayed." I couldn't speak. I just reached for his hand and let the tears fall without shame. Because he was right. I had stayed. Not just physically, but emotionally. Spiritually. Fiercely. I once believed that staying soft meant being breakable. That tears were weakness. That doubt meant failure. But Liam taught me that staying, really staying when it's hard, when you feel small, when people tell you you're not enough, is the bravest thing anyone can do. And sometimes, the softest hands hold the strongest grip. Before bed that night, we lit our Sunday candle early and each wrote something for the jar. Liam's read, "I was brave and stayed." Mine simply said, "We made it through." We added them to the growing pile. Each slip of paper a breadcrumb trail out of fear and into something better. Later, after Liam had fallen asleep, I stepped out onto the porch. The night was cool, the sky clear. I looked up, thinking of Michael, wondering if he'd be proud. Not of the courtroom win or the paperwork filed, but of this life. This messy, loving, stubborn life. I didn't whisper into the dark. I didn't ask for signs. I just stood there, hand over my heart, knowing that somewhere beyond grief and silence, he saw us. Inside, Liam stirred in his bed and rolled over, one arm flung over his stuffed tiger, a faint smile playing on his lips. We were okay. We were whole. And we were the brave ones who stayed.